That's a good question. I think that like I'll be totally transparent with you. I actually currently don't have a position in the Canadian market, partly because I'm actually waiting to see what kind of things settle out. We've had just this blitz of consolidation in the last 2 months,
Right.
and I'm looking to see, at least from that perspective, that whole process of merging a company and acquiring them and folding them into your operations has not been easy at any point through this entire run of cannabis companies.
Yeah.
So as much as it is a very much a land grab for market share, you're very much kind of picking up these operators that in some cases are just brands, like they're not anything beyond a brand, to essentially consume a piece of that market share to expand your footprint. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens there over the next 2 quarters. We'll get a really good sense of what those acquisitions look like. The big buying sprees at this point, at least, were HEXO and Canopy, with some pretty sizable ones. So, I mean, I think that HEXO has been fascinating to me for a long time, because I think that HEXO, as an operator in general, they took a different approach to beverages than Canopy, and they went with a JV with really an established producer of beverages, and that was with the Truss Molson collaboration, and which is ultimately why you're seeing them having been able to get, at least I'm sure through some convoluted financial structure of licensing and IP and all of that exists in the, so you're not touching the plant. They've managed to get a beverage with THC on the market in Colorado, which is quite, which to me is an incredible feat to kind of achieve that. But I think you achieve that by going with an incumbent, which we call it Molson in Canada. Molson is like the footnote. It is Coors all the way when you're in Colorado. Yeah. And that is, that's a backbone of many things within Colorado is that brewing company and that relationship. And ultimately there's a lot of relationship between alcohol producers and governments, because distribution and licensing and all those things are affected on a constant basis, because alcohol is so heavily taxed by government. So there's such an investment in the government relations category. So you look at a juggernaut like Molson Coors, and they've got, they for sure have a very sophisticated operation in Colorado, and ultimately they're in a position where they've broken that glass ceiling, or that threshold of Canadian operator sells THC in beverage form in the United States.
That's insane. I had no idea that was going on down there. Do you know what that drink is called and how they were able to do that?
I believe I would look at the Truss is the TRUSS is the kind of the JV that sits at the center of it, and I think I would look at what they're like. I off the top of my head, I don't know specifically what it is. I just remember kind of reading the press release and knowing that kind of engaging Molson was always going to be a big on-ramp for them. I looked at it with a lot of skepticism initially, because it was a big get, right? Most of the Canadian operators were sophisticated in cannabis, but as far as trying to merge with a big company that had done, some pretty incredible things, had grown, internationally, and has this recognizable brand and these unbelievable, they're innovating operations, right? Like not just innovating products, they're innovating, automation and things like that. To merge a cannabis company into that, which is kind of like, a university taking on, a grade schooler, there's always a risk of tension, right? Like maybe you don't meet the mark for that. So when they finally got things rolling, it was always going to be fast, because that was the part, the experience of having done it over and over and over again was always going to, that was going to pay off for that relationship. So I think that's quite fascinating. I think that would be kind of, I would say that, that's where I kind of keep looking. I think it's interesting, kind of how they've approached things in general as a company. I also think it's a little bit, at the same time, I roll my eyes at the idea that the founders have also published a book talking about a $1 billion startup. And the reality is kind of have to be profitable before you really want to talk about those types of things. But nonetheless, I mean, what the company is doing in the landscape is quite fascinating to me.
Oh, for sure. And that's absolutely hilarious. They wrote a book, because $1 billion startup is misleading. $1 billion valuation is very different than $1 billion.
Yeah, I find it wild when I guess I missed it when we started looking at things and saying like value is the marker and not profitability and not those things. You know, and I think that, you know, it's so wild to see how much how many write downs there have been in the space, because really like that's value evaporating. That's going the other direction.
So well, actually, it's funny that you said that, because Canopy has an insane amount of write downs, right?